Welcome back. It is I, Wendy, yet again, to continue on with the story. And I'm going to continue on now. Where did Peter leave us off? Oh, Chapter 10, The Happy Home. Well, one important result of the brush with the pirates on the lagoon was that it made the natives our friends. Peter had saved Tiger Lily from the dreadful fate, and now there was nothing she or her tribe would do for him. All night they would sit above, keeping watch over the home under the ground, and await the big attack by the pirates, which obviously could not have been much longer delayed. Even by day they hung about, smoking the pipe of peace and almost looking as if they wanted tidbits to eat. Well, they called Peter the Great White Father, kneeling themselves before him, and he liked this tremendously. So it was not really good for him. The Great White Father, he would say to them in a very lordly manner as they groveled at his feet, is glad to see the Pickaninny warriors protecting his wigwam from the pirates. I, Tiger Lily, the lovely creature would reply. Peter Pan saved me, his very nice friend. I let no pirates hurt him. She was far too pretty to cringe in this way, but Peter thought it was his due, and he would answer condescendingly, This is good. Peter Pan has spoken. Always when he said Peter Pan has spoken, it meant that they must now shut up, and they accepted it humbly in that spirit. But they were by no means so respectful to the other boys, whom they looked upon just as ordinary braves. They say how do to them, and things like that, and what annoyed the boys was that Peter seemed to think that this was all right. Secretly, I sympathized with them a little, but I was far too loyal a housewife to listen to any complaints against Father. Father knows best, I'd always say, whatever my private opinion must be. My private opinion was that the natives should not call me a squawk. Well, we have now reached the evening that is to be known among them as the Night of Nights, because of its adventure and of our upshot. The day, as if quietly gathering its forces, had been almost uneventful, and now the natives in their blankets were at their post above, while below the children were having their evening meal, all except Peter, who had gone out to get the time. And the only way you got the time on the island was to follow the crocodile and stay near him till the clock struck. The meal happened to be make-believe tea, and they sat around the board guzzling in their greed, and really, what with their chatter and their reclamations, the noise was positively deafening. To be sure, I did not mind noise, but I simply would not have them grabbing things and then excusing themselves by saying Toodles had pushed their elbow. There was a fixed rule that they must never hit back at meals, but should refer to the matter of dispute to me by raising the right arm politely and saying, I complain of so-and-so. But what usually happened was that they forgot to do this, or did it too much. Silence! I cried, for when the 20th time I had told them that they were not all to speak at once. Is your mug empty slightly, darling? Not quite empty, Mummy, Slightly said, after looking into the imaginary mug. Well, he hasn't even begun to drink his milk, Nibs interposed. This was telling, and Slightly seized his chance. I complain of Nibs, he cried promptly. John, however, had held his hand first. Yes, John. May I sit in Peter's chair? as he's not here? Sit in father's chair, John? Certainly not. Well, he's not really our father, John answered. He didn't even know how to be a father until I showed him. This was grumbling. We complain of John, cried the twins. Toodles held up his hand. He was so much the humblest of them. Indeed, he was the only humble one, that I was especially gentle with him. I don't suppose, Toodles said timidly, that I could be father. No, Toodles. And once Toodles began, which was not very often, he had a silly way of going on. Well, as I can't be father, he said heavily, I don't suppose, Michael, you would let me be baby? No, I won't, Michael rapped out, and he was already in his basket. Well, as I can't be baby, Toodles said, getting heavier and heavier, do you think I could be a twin? No, indeed, replied the twins. It is awfully difficult to be a twin. As I can't be anything important, said Toodles, would any of you like to see me do a trick? No, they had all replied. Then at last he stopped. I hadn't really any hope, he said. Then the fateful telling broke out again. Slightly is coughing on the table. The twins began with cheesecakes. Curly is taking both butter and honey. Nibs is speaking with his mouth full. I complain of the twins. I complain of Curly. I complain of Nibs. Oh, dear, dear. I sure sometimes think that spinsters are to be envied. I told them to clear away, and I sat down to my work basket, a heavy load of stockings, and every knee with a hole in it, as usual. Wendy, scolded Michael, I'm too big for a cradle. I must have somebody in the cradle, I said almost tartly, and you are the littlest. A cradle is such a nice homey thing to have in a house. And while I sewed, they played around me, such a group of happy faces and dancing limbs, lit up by that romantic fire. It had become a very familiar scene, this in the home under the ground. But we were looking on it for the last time. There was a step above, and I was the first to recognize it. Children, I hear your father's step. He likes you to meet him at the door. Above, the natives had crouched before Peter. Watch well, braves. Peter Pan has spoken. And then, as so often before, the gay children dragged him from his tree, and as so often before, but never again. He had brought nuts for the boys, as well as the correct time for me. Peter, you just spoil them, you know, I simpered. Ah, old lady, said Peter, hanging up his gun. It was me who told him mothers are called old lady, Michael whispered to Curly. I complain of Michael, said Curly instantly. Well, the first twin came to Peter. Father, we want to dance. Dance away, my little man, said Peter, who was in high good humor. But we want you to dance. Peter really was the best dancer among them, but he pretended to be scandalized. Me? My old bones would rattle. And Mummy, too. What? I cried. The mother of such an armful dance. But on a Saturday night, slightly insinuated. It was not really Saturday night. At least it may have been, for we had lost count of the days. But, as always, if we wanted to do anything special, we said this was Saturday night. And then I did it. A course, it is Saturday night, Peter, I said relentingly. People of our figure, Wendy? But it is only among our own children. True, true. And so, we were told we could dance. But the children must put on their nighties first. Ah, old lady, Peter said aside to me, warming himself by the fire and looking down at me as I sat. There is nothing more pleasant of an evening for you and me when the day's toll is over than to rest by the fire with the little ones nearby. It is sweet, Peter, isn't it? I said, frightfully gratified. Peter, I think Curly has your nose. Michael takes after you. And I went to him and put my hand on his shoulder. Dear Peter, with such a large family, of course, I have now passed my best. But you don't want to exchange me, do you? No, Wendy. Certainly he did not want a change, but he looked at me uncomfortably, blinking, like one not sure whether he was awake or asleep. Peter, what is it? Well, I was just thinking, he said, a little scared. This is only make-believe, isn't it? That I'm their father? Oh, yes, I said primly. 'Cause you see, he continued apologetically, it would make me seem so old to be their real father. But they are ours, Peter, yours and mine. But not really, Wendy. Not if you don't wish it, I replied, and I distinctly heard his sigh of relief. Peter, I asked, trying to be firm, what are your exact feelings about me? Those of a devoted son, Wendy. I thought so. And I went and sat by myself at the extreme end of the room. You're so queer, he said, frankly puzzled, and Tiger Lily is just the same. There is something she wants to be to me, but she says it is not my mother. No, indeed it is not, I implied with frightful emphasis. Then what is it? Well, it isn't for a lady to tell. Oh, very well, Peter said, a little nettled. Perhaps Tinker Bell will tell me. Oh, yes, Tinker Bell will tell you. She's an abandoned little creature. Now here Tink, who was in her bedroom, eavesdropping, squeaked out something impudent. She says she glories in being abandoned, Peter interpreted. Then he had a sudden idea. Well, perhaps Tink wants to be my mother. You silly man, cried Tinker Bell in a passion. She had said it so often that I didn't need a translation now. I almost agree with her, I snapped. And fancy me snapping. But I had been much tired, and little did I know what was to happen before the night was out. If I had known, I would not have snapped. None of us knew. Perhaps it was best not to know. Our ignorance gave us one more glad hour, and as it was to be our last hour on the island, let us rejoice that there were 60 glad minutes of it. We sang and danced in our nightgowns. Such a deliciously creepy song it was, in which we pretended to be frightened at our own shadows, little whittling that so soon shadows would close in upon us, from whom we would really shrink in fear. So uproariously gay was the dance, and how we buffeted each other on the bed and out of it. It was a pillow fight rather than a dance, and when it was finished, the pillows insisted on one more bout, like partners who know that they may never meet again. The stories we told before it was time for my good night story. Even Slightly tried to tell a story that night, but the beginning was so fearfully dull that it appalled not only the others, but himself. And he said happily, "Yes, it is a dull beginning. I say, let's pretend that it is the end." And then at last, they all got into bed for my story. The story they loved the best, and the story that Peter hated. Usually, when I began to tell the story, he would leave the room or put his hands over his ears, and if possibly, he would have done either of those things. This time, we ought still be on the island, but tonight, he remained on his stool, and we shall see what happens next time. And next time, I will share with you the story I shared with the boys on our last night in Neverland. But until then, please be safe and take care. Bye.